They tore down my grandfather's bridge at 6:12 in the morning, and I still remember the sound it made when the first stone cracked loose into the creek. Deep, hollow, almost human. I was standing there in sweatpants and work boots, holding a coffee mug like an idiot while a bulldozer ripped through something my family had built 80 years ago with bare hands. And the woman responsible for it all? She was standing 50 feet away in a white pantsuit, filming the whole thing on her phone like it was entertainment. What she didn't know yet was that I owned the only other road into her precious gated community. My name's Caleb Mercer. I'm 56 years old, born and raised outside Asheville, North Carolina, and until all this happened, I was the kind of man most people forgot existed 5 minutes after talking to him. Civil engineer, widower, lives alone in the woods, drinks black coffee, fixes old tractors for fun. That was basically my entire personality. My wife Diane used to joke that if silence were a profession, I'd make employee of the month every year. She passed 3 winters ago from pancreatic cancer, and after that, I stopped needing much from the world. Quiet mornings, my workshop, the creek behind the house, that was enough. The land had belonged to my family since 1941. My grandfather Elijah Mercer bought it with money he made repairing railroad equipment during the war, and in 1944 he built a narrow stone bridge over Hollow Creek because the spring floods kept washing out the old timber crossing. He hauled limestone out of the water himself with a mule named Chester. My dad helped lay the beams when he was 12 years old. By the time I came along, the bridge was already part of family mythology. Every Mercer kid learned how to drive crossing that thing. Every Christmas photo, every fishing trip, every goodbye before college. Somehow that bridge always ended up in the background. It wasn't historic to anybody else, but to me, it was the closest thing I had left to hearing my grandfather's voice. Then came Briar Glen Estates. 82 luxury homes squeezed on what used to be farmland 2 miles east of me. Big stone entrance sign, fake Southern charm, HOA bylaws thicker than a Bible. The kind of neighborhood where people complain if your mailbox isn't emotionally aligned with the hydrangeas. At first, we barely interacted. Developers needed temporary drainage access across one corner of my land during construction. I negotiated a legal easement, got paid fairly, signed paperwork, and a story. Or at least I thought it was the end. Then Vanessa Holloway got elected HOA president. Lord, even saying her name still makes me tired. Vanessa was 61, former real estate agent, recently divorced, always dressed like she expected paparazzi to jump out from behind shrubbery. Platinum blonde hair, giant sunglasses, silk scarves in 90-degree weather. She had this way of smiling at people where you could feel the insult hiding behind her teeth. First time she came to my property, she walked around like she was inspecting a hotel she might buy. She stopped near the bridge, tilted her head, and said, "You know, this whole area could be absolutely beautiful if somebody modernized it." I remember laughing because I genuinely thought she was joking. She wasn't. About a month later, a certified letter arrived claiming my bridge was an environmental hazard and an obstruction negatively affecting community aesthetics. Community aesthetics. That phrase still makes my eye twitch. According to the letter, the HOA had commissioned a safety review recommending immediate demolition. Only problem was the bridge wasn't anywhere near HOA property. It sat entirely on my land. Always had. I drove into town the next morning and showed the paperwork to my attorney, Russell Pike, old guy with nicotine fingers and suspenders who looked permanently disappointed in humanity. He read the letter twice, snorted, and said, "Caleb, legally speaking, these people can kiss your ass." That should have been the end of it. But people like Vanessa don't hear the word no. They hear a challenge. 3 days later, she showed up at my house unannounced. White Mercedes SUV, heels sinking into gravel, perfume so strong I could smell her before she knocked. I stepped onto the porch, and she handed me another folder. "Mr. Mercer," she said sweetly, "we're trying to handle this cooperatively." I flipped through the papers. Same fake environmental concerns. Same vague threats. You don't have authority over my property, I told her. Her smile tightened just a little. Sometimes communities have to make difficult decisions for the greater good. I remember staring at her for a second thinking, this woman genuinely believes she's important. Vanessa, I said, that bridge was standing before you ever discovered contour makeup. It'll still be standing after your HOA disappears. Oh, she hated that. Her whole face changed. Cold. Flat. You should be careful not to become difficult, she said quietly. And she turned around and walked back to her SUV. And standing there on my porch, listening to her tires crunch down the driveway, I had the strangest feeling that something ugly had just started. Then exactly 9 days later, I woke up to the sound of diesel engines outside my bedroom window. By the time I got outside, the bulldozer had already torn halfway through the west support wall. Stone exploded into the creek below while dust rolled through the morning air thick enough to taste. I just stood there frozen for a second because your brain doesn't immediately accept something that insane. It tries to make it reasonable first. Maybe county workers made a mistake. Maybe somebody's confused. Maybe this isn't actually happening. Then I saw Vanessa, standing near the road with 2 HOA board members, coffee cup in one hand, phone in the other, recording the demolition like she was documenting a renovation show on HGTV. One of the men beside her actually laughed when a timber beam collapsed into the water. That sound still wakes me up sometimes. I started yelling before I even reached them. Shut it down. That's private property. The bulldozer operator leaned halfway out the cab and shouted back. Lady said it was condemned county infrastructure. Vanessa didn't even flinch. She just lowered her phone slowly and gave me this tiny little smile that said she'd already decided she was untouchable. Mr. Mercer, she called calmly, please don't create a scene. A scene. My grandfather's bridge was being reduced to rubble, and this woman was worried about optics. I walked right up to her close enough to see the foundation makeup cracking around her mouth. You got about 10 seconds, I told her quietly, to explain why there's heavy equipment on my land. She crossed her arms. Your bridge posed a safety liability to the surrounding community. The surrounding community can go around it. We attempted cooperation. You mailed me landscaping pamphlets pretending they were engineering reports. One of the board members muttered, Jesus Christ, under his breath because even he knew this was insane now that I was standing there in front of them. Vanessa ignored him. You've become hostile and irrational, Caleb. That part almost made me laugh. Irrational. There's something incredible about rich people weaponizing calmness while they actively destroy your life. I called the sheriff. Took 45 minutes for deputies to arrive. 45 minutes watching pieces of my childhood crash into the creek while diesel smoke drifted through the trees. By the time law enforcement got there, the bridge was gone. Deputy Warren walked the site, took notes, asked questions, but I could already see where this was headed. Civil dispute, property disagreement, lawyer territory. Vanessa handed him a neat folder full of printed documents and fake concern. We acted in good faith for public safety, she said softly. Public safety? God. I remember looking at the creek after they left. Muddy water swirling around shattered limestone blocks my grandfather had set by hand 80 years earlier, and something inside me changed shape permanently. Not rage exactly, colder than that. Cleaner, like a switch flipping behind my ribs. I went back into the house, poured a bourbon at 9:30 in the morning, and started digging through old property records. Because here's the thing most people never understand about civil engineers. We remember infrastructure the way priests remember scripture. Roads, easements, drainage rights, utility access. Those things matter more than most folks realize. And around midnight, sitting at my kitchen table surrounded by dusty survey maps, I found something that made me smile for the first time all day. Briar Glen Estates only had 2 legal access roads. The main entrance everybody used, and the emergency overflow road running behind the eastern ridge. The one crossing my land. The one they'd been using under a temporary development easement scheduled to expire in 61 days. I actually leaned back in my chair laughing to myself because suddenly the whole situation looked different. Vanessa thought she'd bullied a lonely old widower living in the woods. What she'd actually done was pick a property rights fight with a man who'd spent 30 years designing municipal access systems. I called Russell the next morning. He listened quietly while I explained what I found. Then there was this long pause before he whistled low into the phone. "Caleb," he said, "please tell me you're not planning what I think you're planning." "Depends what you think I'm planning." "You own their secondary emergency access?" "Every inch of it." Another pause. Then I heard him laugh. "Well, now, that changes things. We filed the lawsuit that afternoon. Property destruction, trespassing, emotional damages, unauthorized demolition, the whole package." Vanessa responded exactly how you'd expect somebody like her to respond. Not with accountability, with escalation. 3 days later, somebody from county code enforcement showed up on my property claiming my workshop violated setback regulations. Then another citation appeared about improper outdoor storage because my late father's old fishing boat sat beside the barn. Then another one over unsafe gravel displacement on my driveway. It was so stupid, almost became funny. Almost. I finally asked the young code officer straight up, "Son, did somebody tell you to harass me?" Poor kid looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him. "Mr. Mercer, I'm just following instructions." "From whom?" He hesitated too long. That was answer enough. Meanwhile, Vanessa started poisoning the neighborhood narrative online. Briar Glen's private Facebook group suddenly filled with posts about unstable rural residents threatening community safety. Somebody leaked screenshots to me. One post implied grief from losing my wife had made me emotionally unpredictable. Another described me as territorial and aggressive toward families. Families. As if she hadn't demolished something sacred to mine. My friend Ray called me after seeing the posts. "You gonna respond to this garbage?" I was sitting on my porch, sanding an old cedar tackle box that had belonged to Diane's father. "Nope." "Why not?" "Because people like Vanessa survive by dragging everybody into public screaming matches. I'm not giving her that satisfaction." "Then what are you doing?" I remember smiling down at the old survey documents spread across the table beside me. "Homework." That same week, an old friend from county planning named Elise Navarro invited me for coffee. Elise had worked land use administration for almost 20 years and knew every dirty little secret buried inside county paperwork. She sat across from me, stirring sweetener into burnt diner coffee, and finally said, "Off the record, Vanessa has friends helping her." "How friendly?" "County commissioner level friendly." That got my attention. Elise explained that Briar Glen's zoning approvals had moved through review unusually fast. Environmental inspections waived. Utility permits accelerated. Easement extensions approved in days instead of months. And every signature leading back to one name. Commissioner Grant Holloway, Vanessa's ex-brother-in-law. I nearly laughed. Of course, there's always a guy in a suit somewhere quietly holding the ladder while somebody else climbs over the law. Elise leaned closer. "Caleb, if you start pulling records, you didn't hear any of this from me. Wouldn't dream of it. And be careful. People around here protect money before they protect truth." On the drive home, I started realizing something important. This stopped being about the bridge the second Vanessa decided humiliation mattered more than legality. She didn't just want compliance, she wanted dominance. Some people can't stand the existence of boundaries they don't control. And standing there in my kitchen that night, looking at those old county maps, hearing rain taps softly against the windows, I made a decision I still don't regret. If Vanessa Holloway wanted to weaponize property law against me, I was going to teach her what property law actually looked like when somebody understood it better than she ever could. Then 2 days later, I uncovered the document that turned this entire fight into a catastrophe for Briar Glen Estates. The document was buried inside a utility archive box that smelled like mildew and old paper, folded between drainage surveys nobody had touched since 2008. I almost missed it. One single easement amendment attached to Briar Glen's original infrastructure approval stating that the community's secondary emergency access road, the one crossing my property, was never transferred permanently because the county failed to complete final acquisition filings before the development corporation dissolved, which meant legally. That road was still mine. En tira la mine. Every foot of gravel, every drainage ditch, every utility line running beneath it. I sat there staring at the page while thunder rolled outside the clerk's office windows, and honestly, I felt a little bad for them for about 5 seconds. Then I remembered Vanessa standing there filming my grandfather's bridge collapse like it was entertainment. Sympathy disappeared real fast after that. Russell nearly choked on his coffee when I brought him the paperwork. "Holy hell," he whispered, flipping pages faster and faster. "Caleb, if this holds up, Briar Glen's emergency certification is compromised. Meaning if you legally revoke access, fire department response times triple. Insurance carriers panic. Property values nosedive overnight." I leaned back in a chair. "Interesting." He pointed a finger at me immediately. "Don't do that, Smile." I know that, Smile. But the thing is, I wasn't planning revenge anymore. Not exactly. What I wanted was acknowledgement. Accountability. I wanted somebody to finally look me in the eye and admit what they'd done was wrong. Vanessa still hadn't apologized once. Not privately. Not publicly. Nothing. Just more lawyers. More pressure. More smug little statements about community interests. So Russell filed formal notice. 30-day termination of access easement pending renegotiation. Entirely legal. Entirely documented. Entirely catastrophic for Briar Glen. The reaction was immediate. Absolute chaos. My phone started ringing before noon. County supervisors. Emergency management offices. Insurance adjusters. One guy from the fire marshal's office sounded like he was actively sweating through the phone. "Mr. Mercer, surely there's room for compromise here." There was, I told him calmly. Then they bulldozed it. Meanwhile, Briar Glen exploded internally. Residents started realizing their HOA president had picked a war with the wrong man, and now everybody's property values were hanging over a cliff because of it. Screenshots from her Facebook group started pouring in. People screaming at each other online, demanding Vanessa resign, accusing the board of corruption. Somebody leaked security footage showing her joking with contractors the morning my bridge got destroyed, and that pretty much lit the remaining gasoline. Then came the article. Small local newspaper at first. Wealthy HOA facing legal crisis after destruction of historic private bridge. But the story spread because, honestly, it sounded too ridiculous not to click on. News stations picked it up. Reporters camped outside county offices. Suddenly, everybody wanted interviews with the quiet engineer living in the woods. I turned down almost all of them, except one. A young reporter named Melanie Pierce came to my property on a rainy Thursday afternoon wearing muddy boots and carrying a notebook that looked half-drowned already. She asked me why I hadn't retaliated harder, why I didn't just shut the road immediately. I remember looking past her toward the creek where workers had started clearing debris from the destroyed bridge site. "Because there are families in that neighborhood who didn't do this," I said. "Kids, elderly people, folks who bought houses and trusted the wrong leadership. Punishing them doesn't rebuild anything." Melanie got quiet after that. Then she asked the question nobody else had. "What would your grandfather want you to do?" Mon, that one hit me harder than I expected. I looked down at the mud for a second before answering. Probably tell me to stop wasting time being angry and start building something better. The mediation hearing happened 10 days later at the county municipal building. Packed room, cameras everywhere. Residents lined against the walls looking exhausted and embarrassed. Vanessa sat across from me wearing another expensive white outfit, But this time the confidence was gone. She looked tired, smaller somehow, like reality had finally caught up to her. Russell laid out everything clean and simple. Illegal demolition, trespassing, harassment campaign, easement violations, county conflicts of interest. Then he presented my terms. Full reconstruction of the bridge using historical design standards. Public written apology from the HOA board. Permanent protection status for the Mercer Bridge site. Fair compensation for damages. And a long-term paid easement agreement for continued emergency road access. Silence filled that room afterward. You could literally hear camera shutters clicking. Vanessa's attorney whispered furiously into her ear while residents stared at her like strangers. Finally, one older man from Briar Glen stood up near the back. Vietnam veteran, judging by the hat. He looked directly at Vanessa and said, "You tore down an old man's family history because you thought you had power, and now every one of us is paying for your ego." Nobody defended her after that. Nobody. Vanessa finally spoke, maybe 30 seconds later, voice thin and brittle. "I was trying to improve the community." I remember looking at her and realizing something strange. She actually believed that. Somewhere along the way, she'd convinced herself control and improvement were the same thing. That forcing things into her image justified whatever damage happened in the process. That's the dangerous thing about people addicted to authority. Eventually they stop seeing human beings and start seeing obstacles. The settlement got signed 3 days later. Vanessa resigned from the HOA within a month. Moved to Florida not long after. Haven't seen her since. As for the bridge, we rebuilt it that summer. Stone by stone. Local masons volunteered labor. My daughter flew in from Seattle with my grandson for the dedication ceremony. And the craziest part? Several Briar Glen residents came too. Brought food. Helped plant wildflowers near the creek. One older couple even donated toward a scholarship fund we started in my grandfather's name for trade school students studying construction and civil engineering. Funny how things work sometimes. A fight that started with destruction ended up building something bigger than the bridge itself. These days I sit on my porch most mornings with black coffee listening to tires roll softly across those new timber planks, and sometimes I think about Diane, about how hard she'd laugh seeing me accidentally become some kind of folk hero for angry property owners across western North Carolina. Life's weird like that. But I'll leave you with this because maybe somebody watching needs to hear it. Boundaries matter. Property matters. Legacy matters. And the moment people start believing power gives them permission to erase those things, somebody has to stand up and remind them they were wrong. So tell me honestly down in the comments, if somebody destroyed something your family built with their bare hands, would you have handled it the way I did, or would you have gone further? And if you've ever dealt with an HOA nightmare, corrupt local officials, or neighbors who thought money made them untouchable, I want to hear your story too. Sometimes the only thing stronger than bad people with power is a community paying attention.